Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Imagine you've finally built the life you wanted. You have the perfect home and the person you love. But there's one problem. Your parents have a key and they don't plan on knocking. What do you do when your family demands you choose between them and your spouse? Today, we're diving into a story called the In-Law Ultimatum. It's a situation many people face in real life, and it's full of difficult conversations. We're going to look at 10 chapters of this drama, and along the way, we'll pick up the English phrases you need to talk about boundaries, conflict, and standing your ground. Have you ever felt stuck in the middle of a family fight? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's get into Chapter 1, The Spare Key.
The sun had just begun to trace golden lines across the kitchen floor when the sound of a turning lock echoed through the hallway. Sarah and Mark were still in their pajamas, enjoying a rare moment of Saturday morning silence. They hadn't invited anyone over. They weren't expecting a delivery. "Surprise! We decided to bring over some of those pastries you like," a loud, familiar voice boomed. Before Mark could even stand up, his parents, Evelyn and Arthur, were standing in the kitchen. Evelyn didn't wait for a greeting. She immediately began opening cabinets, looking for plates. "Honestly, Mark, this kitchen is a mess. How do you find anything in here?" Sarah felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It wasn't just about the mess or the pastries. It was the spare key. They had given it to their parents for emergencies, a burst pipe or a forgotten oven, not for unannounced inspections. "Mom, Dad, it's 8 a.m., Mark said, his voice caught between a laugh and a sigh. He looked at Sarah, whose eyes were fixed firmly on her coffee mug. He knew she was upset, but he didn't want to make a scene. "You could have called first." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Arthur replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down as if he owned the place. "We're family. We don't need an invitation to see our own son." As Evelyn began rearranging the items on their counter, Sarah realized the silence in the room was heavy. The boundary hadn't just been crossed, it had been completely ignored. The emergency key had become a tool of control.
Dinner was supposed to be a peace offering, but the steam rising from the lasagna felt more like a storm cloud. Evelyn watched Sarah place the dish on the table, her eyes narrowing as she inspected the crust. "It's a bit dark on top, isn't it?" Evelyn remarked, reaching for the salt before even taking a bite. "I followed the recipe exactly," Sarah replied, her voice tight but polite. "Recipes are just suggestions, dear," Evelyn sighed. "In my day, we cooked by feel, not by a piece of paper." Mark cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation toward safer waters. "So, Dad, how is the retirement fund coming along?" he asked, hoping to distract him. Arthur didn't look up from his plate. He was too busy poking at a piece of broccoli. "It's fine, but I'm more worried about your career, son," Arthur said bluntly. "I heard your company is restructuring. You should have taken that management job I told you about last year." Mark put his fork down. "I like my current role, Dad. It gives me a better work-life balance." "Work-life balance is a luxury for people who don't want to get ahead," Arthur countered. Sarah looked at Mark, waiting for him to defend their choice to prioritize their time together. Instead, Mark just shrugged and took a long sip of water, leaving the air thick with tension. Then Evelyn turned her attention to the living room, pointing toward the new curtains Sarah had spent weeks picking out. "Those patterns are very bold," she said, making bold sound like a terminal illness. "You really should have asked me first. I know a wonderful decorator who could save this room." Sarah gripped her napkin under the table, realizing that in this house, every choice was an invitation for a lecture. The meal continued in silence, the taste of the food overshadowed by the bitter flavor of unsolicited advice. The following Tuesday, Evelyn dropped by again, this time with a stack of old photo albums and a heavy dose of nostalgia. Sarah was trying to work from the dining table, but Evelyn seemed determined to take a trip down memory lane. "Oh, look at this one, Sarah," Evelyn said, sliding a glossy photo of a blonde woman across the table. "That's Chloe. Do you remember her, Mark? She was your high school sweetheart." Mark glanced over from the kitchen, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, that was 15 years ago." "She was such a lovely girl," Evelyn continued, ignoring him. "So traditional. She always knew exactly how to host a formal dinner." Sarah felt the sting of the implication. It was a direct hit on the casual dinner from the week before. "She actually called me last week," Evelyn added casually, though the timing felt anything but accidental. "She's a partner at a law firm now, but she still finds time to bake her own bread every single morning." Sarah looked at the photo, then at the piles of work documents surrounding her laptop. She realized Evelyn wasn't just sharing a memory, she was building a yardstick to measure Sarah against. "I'm sure she's very talented," Sarah said, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Talented and devoted," Evelyn corrected. "She always understood the importance of putting family traditions first." Mark walked over and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, but he didn't tell his mother to stop. "Anyway, Sarah's doing amazing things at her firm, too. We're really busy right now." Evelyn just hummed a low, skeptical tune and turned the page to another photo of the perfect ex-girlfriend. The message was loud and clear. In Evelyn's eyes, Sarah was a second-place prize in a race she hadn't even known she was running. Sarah closed her laptop, the feeling of inadequacy starting to bloom like a dark bruise. The disagreement happened over a simple phone call regarding the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. Sarah and Mark had decided to host a small, quiet dinner for two this year to recover from a stressful work month. When Mark broke the news to his mother, the explosion wasn't loud. It was chillingly quiet. "I see," Evelyn had said before hanging up the phone without another word. For the next 3 days, the phone stayed silent. No emergency visits, no texts, and no unsolicited advice. Mark called his father twice, but Arthur simply said, "Your mother is very hurt, Mark. I don't think she can talk right now." Mark paced the living room, checking his notifications every 5 minutes with a look of growing guilt. "Maybe we should just give in," Mark whispered, looking defeated. "It's easier than dealing with this wall of ice." Sarah sat on the sofa, realizing that the silence was a weapon designed to make them feel like disobedient children. "It's not easier, Mark. It's emotional manipulation," she replied, her heart aching for him, but her mind set on the truth. Every time Mark tried to bridge the gap, he was met with a one-word response or a heavy audible sigh from the other end. The pressure was building, making Mark irritable and distracted, exactly as his parents intended. By Friday, the guilt had become a physical weight in the house, threatening to crush their plans for a peaceful weekend. Sarah realized that the silent treatment wasn't about missing them, it was about waiting for them to break. She watched her husband reach for his phone again, knowing whoever spoke first would lose the power in the relationship. The air in the apartment felt thin, as if the oxygen was being sucked out by the tension of the unsaid. It was a test of endurance, and Mark was starting to crack under the strain of his mother's calculated absence. The disagreement happened over a simple phone call regarding the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday.
Sarah and Mark had decided to host a small, quiet dinner for two this year to recover from a stressful work month. When Mark broke the news to his mother, the explosion wasn't loud, it was chillingly quiet. "I see," Evelyn had said, before hanging up the phone without another word. For the next 3 days, the phone stayed silent. No emergency visits, no texts, and no unsolicited advice. Mark called his father twice, but Arthur simply said, "Your mother is very hurt, Mark. I don't think she can talk right now." Mark paced the living room, checking his notifications every 5 minutes with a look of growing guilt. "Maybe we should just give in," Mark whispered, looking defeated. "It's easier than dealing with this wall of ice." Sarah sat on the sofa, realizing that the silence was a weapon designed to make them feel like disobedient children. "It's not easier, Mark. It's emotional manipulation," she replied, her heart aching for him, but her mind set on the truth. Every time Mark tried to bridge the gap, he was met with a one-word response or a heavy, audible sigh from the other end. The pressure was building, making Mark irritable and distracted, exactly as his parents intended. By Friday, the guilt had become a physical weight in the house, threatening to crush their plans for a peaceful weekend. Sarah realized that the silent treatment wasn't about missing them, it was about waiting for them to break. She watched her husband reach for his phone again, knowing whoever spoke first would lose the power in the relationship. The air in the apartment felt thin, as if the oxygen was being sucked out by the tension of the unsaid. It was a test of endurance, and Mark was starting to crack under the strain of his mother's calculated absence.
The pressure finally exploded on the evening of Sarah and Mark's 3rd wedding anniversary. They had planned a quiet, romantic dinner at a high-end restaurant they had been wanting to try for months. Just as they were leaving the house, the doorbell rang with a persistent, aggressive rhythm. It was Evelyn and Arthur, dressed in formal wear and carrying a large, heavy gift box. "We're going to that new French bistro tonight, and we decided you two are coming with us," Arthur announced, stepping inside. "Dad, we have a reservation. It's our anniversary," Mark said, his voice trembling with frustration. "A reservation can be canceled," Evelyn snapped, her eyes flashing with a cold authority. "This is a family celebration. We bought this expensive gift for you, and the least you can do is join us." The argument lasted for 20 minutes in the hallway, the air growing hot and suffocating as the parents refused to leave. Sarah watched the clock, seeing their anniversary plans slip away, replaced by the familiar feeling of being ignored. "Enough!" Mark finally shouted, a sound so sudden that the room fell instantly silent. "We are not going. We are going to our dinner, alone, like we planned. Please leave." The silence that followed was deafening as Evelyn clutched her pearls, looking at Mark as if he had physically struck her. The night was ruined, not by the argument, but by the realization that their peace would always be under attack. It was the breaking point. They could no longer pretend that going with the flow was working. As the parents finally walked out, slamming the door behind them, Sarah and Mark stood in the quiet hallway, shaking. The ultimatum wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a necessity for their survival as a couple.
2 days later, Sarah and Mark sat at their dining table, but this time they were the ones holding the meeting. They had spent the entire weekend discussing their non-negotiables, the rules that would protect their marriage. When the parents arrived, expecting an apology, they were met with 2 calm, focused adults and a sheet of paper. "We love you," Mark began, his voice steady for the first time in years, "but things are going to change starting today.
First, Sarah added, sliding a small bowl across the table, we need the spare key back. Evelyn's face turned a deep shade of red, but Mark didn't blink or look away. From now on, visits must be scheduled at least 24 hours in advance, no exceptions, Mark continued. And we will no longer discuss our finances or our career choices during dinner. Those topics are off limits. Arthur tried to interrupt with a sarcastic comment about gratitude, but Mark held up a hand to stop him. If these boundaries are crossed, the visit will end immediately. We will walk away from the conversation. They were practicing the language of assertiveness, using clear I statements instead of pointing fingers. The parents sat in stunned silence, realizing that the dynamic of power had shifted from the old generation to the new. "You're being incredibly cold," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of shock and anger. "No, Mom," Mark replied softly. "We are being healthy. We are drawing a line so that we can still have a relationship with you." The line had been drawn in the sand, and the couple stood together on the other side of it.
The following week, the silence was replaced by a storm of phone calls, emails, and unexpected wellness checks from family friends. Evelyn had not taken the new boundaries as an invitation to respect them. She had taken them as a declaration of war. "How could you let her turn you against us?" Evelyn cried into the phone when Mark finally answered a call on Tuesday. She didn't use Sarah's name. She referred to her only as she or that woman, as if Sarah were a stranger. "No one is turning me against anyone, Mom," Mark argued, his voice tired from days of defending their position. "We just need you to call before you come over. That is a normal request for any adult couple." "It's brainwashing," Arthur's voice boomed in the background. "She is pulling you away from the people who raised you." The accusations began to spread like a wildfire, reaching Mark's cousins and even his childhood friends. Sarah received a message from Mark's sister, accusing her of being controlling and breaking up a happy home. The pressure was no longer just coming from the parents, it was coming from the entire family tree. Every time Sarah walked into the kitchen, she felt the invisible weight of a dozen people judging her every move. The parents were playing the role of the victims, telling anyone who would listen that they were being locked out of their son's life. Mark was caught in the center of the backlash, feeling the sting of his family's collective disappointment. The open confrontation had arrived, and it was much uglier than the subtle comments or the silent treatment. The couple realized that setting a boundary was the easy part. The hard part was surviving the explosion that followed. Sarah looked at Mark and saw a man who was losing his sense of peace, torn between his past and his future. The tension finally reached a boiling point on a rainy Thursday evening when Evelyn arrived at their door, crying. She didn't use the key this time, but she pounded on the wood until Mark opened it, looking exhausted. "I can't live like this, Mark," she sobbed, pushing past him into the living room where Sarah was sitting. "You have to choose. Either we are a family again, the way we were, or you can stay here in this cold house." Mark looked from his mother, who was trembling with dramatic grief, to Sarah, who stood up slowly. The room felt smaller than ever, and the air was thick with the finality of the moment. "Mom, I love you," Mark began, his voice shaking, "but Sarah is my wife. She is my home now." Evelyn stopped crying instantly, her face hardening into a mask of cold, sharp anger. "Then you are choosing a stranger over your own blood," she hissed, looking at him as if she didn't recognize him. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding against her ribs, but her voice remained calm and steady. "I am not a stranger, Evelyn. I am the person who supports him every single day when you aren't around."
Mark took Sarah's hand, his grip firm for the first time in months, signaling a shift in the power of the room. "If you can't respect our marriage, then you can't be a part of our daily lives," Mark said, delivering the final word. Evelyn stared at their joined hands for a long moment before turning toward the door without saying another word. The sound of the door closing wasn't loud, but it felt like the heaviest sound Sarah had ever heard. Mark leaned his head against Sarah's shoulder, a mix of deep sadness and immense relief washing over him. The ultimatum had been met, and though the cost was high, the path forward was finally clear.
The months that followed were quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than the one Evelyn had weaponized. It was the silence of a house that finally belonged to the two people living inside of it. Sarah and Mark spent their Saturdays waking up late, making coffee, and enjoying the fact that no one was turning the lock. The emergency key had been returned, and with it, a sense of privacy they hadn't realized they were missing. They had transitioned to a low-contact relationship with Mark's parents, speaking only on holidays or brief, polite phone calls. It wasn't the perfect happy ending of a movie, but it was a healthy reality that allowed them to breathe again. One afternoon, while working in the garden of their modest but independent home, Mark looked at Sarah and smiled. "I realized something today," he said, shaking the dirt from his gardening gloves. "I used to think that being a good son meant saying yes to everything they wanted." "And now?" Sarah asked, pausing her work to look at him. "Now I know that being a good husband means saying no when our peace is at stake," he replied firmly. They had become a united front, a team that made decisions based on their own goals rather than someone else's expectations. Evelyn had eventually reached out, offering a small apology that felt more like a white flag than a total change of heart. But the dynamic had shifted forever. The parents were now guests in their lives, not the directors of them. As the sun set over their yard, Sarah realized that the ultimatum hadn't destroyed their family. It had simply forced them to build a stronger foundation, one made of respect, boundaries, and chosen love. They walked back into their home together, closing the door on the past and locking it from the inside. And that is the end of our story. Mark and Sarah finally found their peace, but as we saw, it wasn't easy. Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest real-life challenges anyone can face. It requires a lot of courage and, as we say in English, a united front. Before you go, let's quickly recap 3 key phrases from today's chapters. Unsolicited advice, suggestions you didn't ask for. The silent treatment, ignoring someone to make them feel guilty. To make a scene, to cause a loud or public disturbance. Now I want to hear from you. In Chapter 9, Mark had to make a choice. Do you think he did the right thing? Or was he too harsh on his mother? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. It's a great way to practice your English writing. If you enjoyed this story and want to improve your English with more real-life dramas, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.